Welcome to the Women in Wealth podcast, brought to you by Regina McCann-Hess, a certified financial planner with over 2 decades of experience. This show is for professional women who want guidance in working towards their retirement vision in learning, building, planning, striving for your dreams, and putting the work in now so that you can pursue your financial independence. Hello, I'm Regina McCann-Hess, president of Forge Wealth Management, and welcome to our Women in Wealth series. Today, we're going to talk about long-term care, but in a different sort of fashion. We're going to talk about the caring of women caregivers, or the caring for women caregivers. Because maybe you don't know, women tend to be the backbone of American households and families. We're the caretakers. When our kids are sick, we take care of our kids. When our spouses are sick, we take care of our spouses. When our parents are sick, we take care of our parents. So we're all about the caregiving, and the impact on that. It really does have a huge impact on a lot of things: our financial, emotional, physical well-being, and how we can address our future needs. Basically, we're talking about caregivers, women caregivers. Obviously, there are men caregivers too. I'm not trying to be discriminatory here, but the majority of caregivers are women. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and also about long-term care, because that's where a lot of it happens. So we're going to do an overview of caregiving facts and figures. Then we're going to look at a few other short-term impacts on caregivers, and obviously different ways that you can get outside assistance for some of that care. What are the options? How much does it cost? It's very expensive if you need to outsource that. And then we're going to touch on different types of long-term care insurance. Just as an educational, we're not trying to sell lifetime life insurance or anything. We just want to educate you on what is out there and what are some of the options. We're obviously not going to be able to cover everything, but we're going to cover a few things. All right, so the first thing is that we are multitasking with the sandwich generation. I can't believe I think I'm part of that sandwich generation where, we've raised our kids or are still raising our kids, and then our parents get sick and we wind up taking care of them. So there are basically, I am the picture of that. I'm a middle-aged female. I have kids that are raised, but still in the process, in college. And then also, I do not have to provide care for my mom, but at some point I may have to. And we did at some point have to take care or just assist my father-in-law with some of his healthcare needs as well. What are the roles? We're the caregiver, we're the parent, we're the spouse, we're also the employee or the business owner. It takes a lot out of us. The challenges that we face are that we get burnout, caregiver burnout. We are managing multiple relationships. We are balancing a lot of responsibilities as well. And it also could impact our mental health. You have that burnout, you have that drain, you have that stress, that anxiety. There's no wonder that you can have a mental health issue as a result. And whether or not that's a full-blown mental health issue or just need the basic mental health care, it doesn't matter. You still may need some of that care. And, how that is going to look for you depends on how much you need, how difficult managing your relationships have been while you're balancing all these types of different things. You also may have difficulty balancing your time because you're possibly still raising your kids, or at least dealing with things for your kids. Even if they're not in the home, we're still doing a lot for our kids, as any parent knows. You're also potentially balancing your work. You may have had to step back from work or partially step back from work. You also may have had to step back from family relationships with extended family and or your family friends. You don't have time, or you possibly also don't have the energy to maintain some of those relationships. So there's a lot of burnout there and a lot of difficulty balancing those responsibilities as well. They're just, in the mental health comes in because you're just being pulled into so many different directions throughout the day and trying to figure out what's what and what's up and what's down. All right. So how does this impact women specifically? 56% of family health caregivers are working full time. So those are women working full time. They're informal caregivers, which means they're not getting paid for this. And there are women who step out of the work world to take care of their family members. And again, they're not getting paid for this. We're juggling caring for our family, we're juggling potential full-time, part-time employment, and the average amount of care needed by someone experiencing a long-term care event is 18 hours per week. And is the average care that's times needed for a long-term care event. That's basically 25% of the time of the week, like of a 41-hour week. Then also women are providing care to their mothers who lose an average of about $24,500 or almost $25,000, depending on which inflation scale we're using over a 2-year period, which is why it's like a double ding on us, because we wind up leaving the workforce or decreasing our hours in the workforce, and that also decreases our income, which of course decreases. It's a domino effect, right? It decreases our savings and our retirement savings, and it just goes on. And women are 2 times more likely than men to leave the workforce to keep up with those caregiving responsibilities. And again, remember, if they leave their employment, they're leaving to do this usually for no payment whatsoever. So they're losing benefits at work, and they're taking care of their loved ones basically out of the goodness of their heart, which is wonderful that we're able to do that, but it does have lasting impact on us as well. Now that we've been through that, women needing to provide care, that lasts about 1.5 years longer than men if we're taking care of another female, like if it's our mom or our mother-in-law or something like that. The women's life expectancy is still longer than men. It's average. The average numbers now are saying 6 years average longer lifespans than men. I thought it was 5, but I guess that's changing. And then we also make up 67% of long-term care patients in the facility, in long-term care facilities. And honestly, I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised. I'm surprised that the number is not higher, because a lot of times we wind up taking care of our family members, our male counterparts and our parents and whatnot, and even sometimes our adult children if they have a health issue. And then what happens is we're the ones left alone after those family members go on to the great beyond. We're there by ourselves, taking care of ourselves. And we get to a point where we can't take care of ourselves and there's nobody left to take care of us. So we wind up being the ones going into the long-term care facilities where, because of our care, we may have helped reduce the amount of time that our family was either in a long-term care facility or was at home with us. So that's also something that we want to keep in mind. There's a lot that goes into that as far as women spending a lot of time at the bedside informally, not getting paid for it, things like that. But when we talk about long-term care, a lot of people don't really maybe understand that. Obviously, we all think of the nursing home, walking through a nursing home, and it's an old-fashioned thought pattern because we may have seen grandma back when we were like 4 or 5 to go see her. I don't know. But it is really it's considered a set of certain medical or non-medical services provided to individuals living with a chronic illness, disability, or a condition that's going to be extended over a very extended period of time. And that includes cognitive conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia. And that is a lot of people worry about that. It is a big worry, and it is a big part of the long-term care units in our area as well. And usually in a long-term care facility, there's a physician, a licensed, that will certify that the individual is not able to provide their own everyday care for themselves without assistance. There's not just, I say, oh, I need long-term care. No, there's some jumping points that you have to go through as opposed to just deciding I'm going to put myself in or I'm going to put my family member in. You can if you're paying for it out of pocket, but if you're using any kind of insurance dollars, there's a parameter for how that happens. So a lot of times when we refer to long-term care, we are speaking about not being able to do some of the activities of daily living on your own. And those would include bathing, continence, dressing, eating, toileting, and transferring. So transferring is moving from a chair to walking, or a bed to a chair, things like that. Continence is obviously not being able to regulate your bodily functions. And a lot of times you need at least 2 of these 6 activities of daily living flagged before you're officially considered needing long-term care facilities or treatment. So that is something that your care team, your healthcare team, will help determine whether or not your family member qualifies for it. They might be right on the cusp. They might not really be over the line, but sometimes it's a little gray and sometimes it's clear as day, right? Somebody who cannot walk by themselves, that is a clear sign that they have problems with transferring. So those are some more clear-cut issues. Now, a lot of times, even though we talk about the activities of daily living, bathing, all those things, if there's a cognitive impairment, that could delineate the need to look at those activities of daily living. So if there's a severe cognitive impairment where it's unsafe for that person to be in the home at that point, then that also is going to open up the possibility of care for them if they have insurance and whatnot. And again, I say if they have insurance. If they don't have insurance, you're just paying out of pocket. But those are some big dollars you're going to be paying out of pocket. So those are the things you want to take into consideration. So now, with everything, there is no one size fits all situation for care. So there's a lot of different types of care. And one of the first types is adult daycare. So that would be for the person, say I'm home taking care of my family member and I also need to work. I can send them or drop them off, or sometimes there's a little jitney that could come by and take them to a quote unquote a daycare center that is really targeted for adults who have healthcare needs. Now, obviously they can't be completely dependent. They have to have some kind of independence there in order to do that, but they can still use this as a beginning layer. There's also home health care. You can have home health care aides come in and help with some of the bathing and toileting and transferring and things like that if you're keeping your family member at home. There's assisted living care where if it's a little too much for you, it's gotten to the point where it's too much for you to do this on your own. I remember when my aunt, she was caring for my uncle in her home, and he was a big guy. And after a couple falls, she realized, I can't keep lifting him by myself. And that's when he was entered into assisted living. But she kept trying and trying until there was too many falls. And that's when the assisted living came into play. He was still able to do some things for himself, but he needed extra care. And so that's where you would consider assisted living. There's intermediate care as well. That's going to be a little bit more formal care than being at home, obviously. There's also hospice care for somebody who has a diagnosis that's not really going to be here long term. Now, hospice care can be done in your home. It can also be done in a care facility. I've seen it done both ways. That's just when you're making that person a little bit more comfortable. You're tending to their daily needs, but you're not prolonging things. And it doesn't mean that they're going to pass within days. Sometimes hospice takes a little while, depending on the health issue at the time. So we have that. And of course, there's nursing home care. And that is what you picture in your head from the TV and all that stuff, where your loved one is in a nursing home, essentially. And there's 2 beds to a room, and there's nurses, and there's care attendants, and they're in wheelchairs, and they may not be as mobile as they once were, and they're needing help with most of their transfers and things like that. And that's going to be your most expensive care. And that's where, if you have round-the-clock care, that's obviously going to be more expensive. And it's also going to be round-the-clock. It's also going to have professional staffing, things like that. And hospice also will provide round-the-clock care too when you're needed for that. So those are the different types of care options. And like we say, we start out with you're being in your home and your family members are taking care of you as long as they can. And family members do their best, but there sometimes becomes a point where it's unsafe for them to, especially that's where we come into play with some of the cognitive behaviors. Somebody starting the stove and there's a pan there with nothing in it. And you can imagine what could happen there with some of the cognitive declines that we have. So those are things that we take very seriously. Okay, so here's the thing. There's a various costs for, I told you all the different levels of care that you could have. There's obviously a big cost difference with a lot of those as well. I'm going to look down at my screen a little bit because I can't remember all these numbers in my head, but we're going to go through each one and just to give you an idea of how much they cost and what the levels are and how much they increase. And it's a pretty quick increase. And this is why it's such a problem. And we're all worried about how we take care of our older family members. Okay, so adult daycare, like I said, that's where it's the least expensive option, especially that's where you're potentially sending somebody so you can get a couple hours by yourself or go to work or whatever. In 2023, that was just shy of $25,000 a year. Now in 2043, they're expecting that to be about just shy of $45,000 per year. So you could see in that time period, that's a big increase over time. But even still, right now, that's only 2 years ago, $24,700. That's a lot of money, right? A lot of money to be paying, and then you're still trying to do everything else. Then the next is assisted living care. That's about $64,200 in 2023. We have our home health care, that person who's coming to your house. Surprise, it's actually more than assisted living. So this home health care cost in 2023 that we looked at was $75,504 per year. Now, obviously, that is a surprise, but we also have read a lot of research that the longer a person stays in their home, the better off they are. Even with cognitive, big changes, a lot of changes sometimes are very upsetting for senior citizens. And the longer they stay in their own surroundings and their comfort zone, the better they do. Okay, so then we get to nursing home care. And that's where you're like, oof, I really need some help here. For a semi-private room, that means usually 2 people in a room. That's about $104,000 per year in 2023. And then if you wanted your own private room, that's $116,800 on average per year in 2023. Now that was a Genworth cost of care survey, and they do those surveys repeatedly. So we're constantly looking at those updates, and it just costs a lot of money, and it's doing nothing but going up each year. So like I said, that least expensive one was the adult healthcare, the adult daycare healthcare, and as high as the nursing home, where it's complete 100% care for your family member. So this isn't a conversation that any of us want to have. However, not planning for these costs could lead to significant erosion of your retirement savings, any kind of nest egg that you have. I usually refer to it as like a barn fire through your assets. So that is why even if you don't decide not to get insurance, you have to have a plan for how you're going to pay for this. So that is something we'd like to remind people. Okay, so additional costs, there's other costs too, right? Many care costs may not be covered either fully or partially by your health insurance, of course. And of course, Medicare does not cover long-term care. Does not. I'm trying to dispel that myth. Some of the costs that may not be included, and it just depends on what the situation is, housing and specialty care facilities, informal or family caregivers. So if I stay home to take care of my mom, and there's a lot of long-term care policies who will not pay for me to be the caregiver for my family member. However, there are some insurance policies who will pay for it. So if that's important to you, that might be something that you look at. A lot of things that aren't covered are safety-related expenses like home modifications that have to be made for a family member to stay in the home, safety services for a person who wanders. You would think it's cheaper for the insurance company to keep the person at home and they would cover these, but a lot of them don't. I've actually talked to people when they find out like some of the things that are not covered by their long-term care insurance. It's very upsetting. And even some medical equipment and devices aren't covered. Certain prescription drugs aren't covered. It's pretty mind-blowing what the insurance policies will not pay for. So you want to have those conversations, like talk to people who've had family members in long-term care facilities, and did they pay it out of pocket? How did they pay for it? Did they have insurance? What type of long-term care insurance did they have? What was their experience with those insurance companies? Did they have to fight to get their money? Did they get denied on certain charges? And what were those denials? What wasn't covered? It's all about being informed and educated ahead of time. So that's one of the important things. Long-term care costs are just rising. They're not going away. They're not decreasing. They're going up each year, and usually more than inflation. So one of your first options, again, we're talking about your long-term care plan, your strategy. How am I going to pay for this? One of the plans is that you can self-fund. If long-term care is not needed, your money would be available for other needs or other things that you want to spend money on. It's often hard for people to exercise self-control and put a nugget of money away, say, oh, this is in case I need long-term care and I'm not going to touch it for anything else. But there are people who are very good about that, or who have enough money who can sell what we call self-insure. Again, having that conversation ahead of time is super important. Now, I mentioned Medicare does not cover long-term care needs, right? But it is and can be used to cover short-term medical and rehab costs after a medical event or a surgery, but it does not cover the long-term care cost over an extended period. So that's really important to know. The self-funding, like we said, can be an option as long as you have ample assets, but you have to know it's so expensive and you're going to burn through some cash if that's what you choose. The other thing is you have different types of long-term care policies. The traditional long-term care policies, I should say there's probably more than two, but we're going to talk about these right now. The traditional long-term care policy can be custom tailored to both your current and future needs. And if the insurance purchased is not used, sometimes a client can see a benefits of their pay premiums. There might be policies where they create death benefits and do some other different types of things now. But those are policies that would have been used traditionally. That's why they call them traditional, right? They do tend to have the highest level of benefits relative to premium paid, but they only pay out if long-term care is needed. So if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. That's the conundrum there. And that's probably why the hybrid long-term care policy was created, because it provides long-term care benefits for claims and also a life insurance benefit if the long-term care is not needed. Some people feel like, oh, I don't want to buy one of those traditional long-term care policies because I feel like I'm putting my money down a rabbit hole, and if I don't use it, it's just poof, gone, and the insurance company gets all that money. Now the option with the hybrids is, all right, you're still putting money into that rabbit hole, quote unquote. However, you're buying insurance that if you don't use it, there could be a life insurance benefit to one of your beneficiaries if you were to die without using that benefit. So something to think about. Now, the death benefit could be reduced dollar for dollar when the long-term care benefits are exercised, and a cash value and a death benefit may be available if a long-term care does not arise. So those are things to keep in mind when you're thinking about it. It also helps eliminate that. The hybrid one eliminates the need or the thought of the use it or lose it type of scenario that you would have with a traditional long-term care policy. So now let's go a little bit deeper with hybrid versus traditional. There's a hybrid. So if the payment frequency, you could have a fixed amount paid in one payment or a couple of installments. Like you could pay an installment over 5 years or 10 years and then be done. Like you're kind of like picking a package and you're putting that much money into it and then you're done. Whereas a traditional, your premiums could be paid for 10 years. They could be paid over your lifetime for as long as you hold that policy. And the other thing is with the traditional, with those policies have payment increases. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have they did the right thing. They bought these good policies years and years ago, and now they're getting closer to possibly having to use them. But the same token, they're getting like 30% increases. And they're calling me like, what should I do? I'm like, you got to pay it, because you're now at the age where you might use it or your family member might use it, and you don't want to lose that benefit because you're probably not healthy enough to get a new policy anymore. So you can get premium increases from a traditional. You generally do not get premium increases from hybrid policies. The care benefits for a hybrid, it's a monthly amount for long-term care costs within the benefit period selected. So that means it could be like a 3-year plan, it could be a 4-year or 5-year plan. It just depends on what type of policy you get. Same thing with the traditional. It's a monthly amount for your long-term care costs, and it's usually a specific term for when that policy is going to pay for. Do either or both of these policies guarantee the benefit? Yes, assuming you're paying your premiums. If you're not paying your premiums, it's a different conversation. So yes, for the both of them, again, making sure that you're paying your premiums. The hybrid has a death benefit attached to it. The traditional does not. Cash value, the hybrid does have a cash value because of the benefit, the way they capture that death benefit. And obviously a traditional policy will not. Do they have premium return clauses? And I think some policies on both sides offer that clause, and sometimes it might be a certain time frame that you do that, but I believe they both would have that as well. And then cash indemnity or reimbursement, and we're going to talk about that and what that means in a second. So a hybrid could be either, and traditional is only reimbursement. So what is the difference? A reimbursement essentially is what it sounds like. So I've qualified my family member for the long-term care policy. They have care. I have to submit bills every month and say, hey, here are the bills for taking care of my family member. And then the insurance company will review them and either accept or deny them. And they will say, oh, yes, we will say you submit 5 bills. Yes, we're going to cover these, but this last one we don't feel is, or they'll have legal reasons. They'll say that is not covered by the policy. I wish I could give you a good example. I have seen it many times, and it is a little upsetting for the family members when that happens. So reimbursement is you pay out of pocket, then you have to go to the insurance company and say, hey, Mr. Insurance Company, will you reimburse me for the expenses that I believe are covered under my long-term care policy for my family member? And Mr. Insurance Company gets to say, no, or yes, we will pay that. And that's what happens. In a hybrid policy, you have a choice of the reimbursement or cash indemnity. And the cash indemnity is, okay, say your monthly benefit for long-term care is $5,000 a month. You get a check $5,000 a month. They don't look at your bills and say, what are you spending it on? You get the $5,000 and you get to decide, how am I going to use this $5,000 to pay for and care for my family member? Now, obviously, $5,000 a month is not going to cover all your bills. I just made that number up. It has no bearing on anything. I just like to throw a real number in there to make it sound like it's real. So we don't know what your long-term care expenses are going to be, but I could pretty much assume if you're in a long-term care facility, assisted living, it's probably not covering everything. So that is really a lot of information I threw at you. Like I said, indemnity, know the difference between what an indemnity, cash indemnity policy payout is versus a reimbursement payout when you are determining which type of long-term care insurance you are choosing, if it's a hybrid policy and offers those choices. I'm not going to say company names, but there are a lot of great insurance companies out there, and some offer the hybrid reimbursement and some offer the hybrid cash indemnity. And I have had many experiences with my clients, and I know which one I prefer for my clients to purchase for their own family and themselves based on some of those experiences. So you want to ask your friends and family, hey, what type of long-term care insurance did your family have for your loved ones? And what worked for you and what didn't? What would you do differently? Ask your friends, ask your family members who have had a loved one go through this. Ask your financial advisor, like, hey, have you had any clients have to pull on these policies, and what happened? What were the problems that they faced? I think those are good conversations to have. And then the other thing is you want to shop early. It's a couple tips for if you are going to buy long-term care insurance. You want to shop early. You don't want to wait till you're in your mid-70s and say, oh, I think I'm going to buy long-term care insurance now, because you might not be able to get it because you might have been diagnosed with something. And even if you can get it, you're going to pay out the wazoo for it. So the earlier and the healthier you are, the better the pricing may be. And now I'm not saying you buy it when you're 30, but let's be reasonable about the age where you think it might be appropriate for you. And you also want to budget those premium costs so that, you can pay those premiums over your working years. Now, remember, with the hybrid policies, a lot of times you can determine, hey, I'm going to pay for this over 5 years, or I'm going to pay for it all in 1 year. And then once that term's up, you don't pay into it again. So if you are thinking about it, obviously it's easier to pay something like that while you are still working. Okay, so you also want to ask questions. What's the range of long-term care costs in our areas? Where I live and where I work, it's a very expensive area. The long-term care facilities here are way higher than those numbers I quoted you earlier, like way higher. So sometimes I'll talk to people about if they're looking for a community that has a continual care, like an independent, then an assisted, then a nursing home. I sometimes discuss looking in Lancaster or areas like that, areas outside of our area, because we can get the price down a little bit if that's doable for them. That may not be what they want to do because they may not have family there, but it is something to look at and to consider. The other thing is, would a long-term care event threaten my assets, including my home, my business, my gifting strategy, my spouse? Are we going to have to spend down everything if one of us has a long-term care event if we don't have life or long-term care insurance? So that's something you really want to have a thought pattern about. Given my age, my health history, how likely am I to get approved for that? That's another thing to talk about. Let's see what else. Do I have the assets to pay for long-term care? And you know what? That's a really good question, because there's a lot of people who sometimes can't afford the premiums, but they also cannot afford not to have it. It is a wicked double-edged sword. So those are definitely tough conversations to have. And then how can I be sure I'm choosing the right company, the right insurance company? How do I know they're going to be around in the future? Maybe look back at 2008 when the insurance in the financial world collapsed, and some of those insurance companies that had to be bought out by other companies, maybe you avoid them. I don't know. You look at companies who have been around for a long time. Most of these insurance companies they buy insurance for themselves too. I think most of them tend to be qualified providers. However, you want to look at their ratings. You want to look at their history, things like that. Don't assume that they're all good and that are going to be here 10 years from now. So those are some of the questions I want you to ask yourself before going into that kind of conversation. And of course, you want to talk to your financial advisor before making any of these kind of decisions. And if you have your financial advisor, if you have a separate insurance person, that's great too. And definitely have this conversation with your spouse. I think your action item is to look at your assets and have a conversation about if something happens to one of us at least, or both of us, do we have enough to cover a long-term care event? And maybe call around to a couple of the long-term care facilities in your area and see what the costs are. It's pretty staggering. It's sobering too. And see what you would need to do in order to provide for yourself and your family members if that happens. Like I said, what usually happens if there's husband and wife, usually the guy usually does get sick first. We wind up taking care of the men for as long as we can. And then what happens, then we ignore our health, and then eventually our spouse passes and a year or two goes by and we've ignored our health for so long, we've deteriorated too, and then there's nobody left to take care of us. So that's why it's very important for women to think about their caregiving role and the long-term care impacts on them. With that, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Regina McCann-Hess, President of Forge Wealth Management. You can follow me at forgewealth.com. On Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, it's Forge Wealth, and LinkedIn, Regina McCann-Hess. Go make it a great day. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Women in Wealth podcast. You can watch the Founders video I created for you to learn more about me and how I can guide you towards your financial independence at www.forgewealth.com. The information in this podcast is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific, individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision. Securities are offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, and SIPC. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Forge Wealth Management are separate entities from the LPL Financial. Our show guests and their companies are not affiliated with nor endorsed by LPL Financial, Private Advisor Group, or Forge Wealth Management.